Our next person, he's really not a guest. We signed him up, and he's been on the payroll now for about 4 years. And that's Riley Hollingsworth. And Riley is a ham, K4ZDH. But Riley was also he was a special counsel to the FCC for about 10 years, I think, and I'm sure Riley can fill us in on that. And I think he was the one responsible for keeping all of us straight. He was the one that would go out there and get you if you were doing bad. Now, now he has retired from that, and he's with the ARRL. It's kind of a joint thing, ARRL FCC program called the Volunteer Monitor Program, and he's the head of that, and he's going to tell us a little about that tonight. And Riley, we have missed you. I know you've been very busy, but we're going to probably start trimming some of your payback if you don't come on here more often with us. So, hello, Riley. Welcome tonight.
Well, if you trim it back anymore, I'll owe you.
Well, that's
a lot of lost mail around here.
That's what we're trying to get to, actually.
Well, I guess you want to hear about the Volunteer Monitor Program.
Yeah, let's talk about it, man.
All right. Well, for the background and history of the program, I'm not going to bore you with that. If you want to know how we got to that from the OO program, you can go to the League's website and search Volunteer Monitor Program. I'm going to tell you about what we do and what the philosophy is. And I have one promise to you. If I leave you confused tonight, I promise you to leave you confused on a much higher level and about more important things than when the show started. So that's my commitment to you. We have about 165 volunteer monitors across the country, and we've had virtually no turnover in the 10 months or so that we've been in operation, and it's been about 10 months. We worked with the FCC regarding certain areas in which they wanted extra coverage because of their field office cutbacks and budget cutbacks. And in fact, the Volunteer Monitor Program was suggested by the FCC in 2017 as a way to enhance amateur enforcement in view of some of their staff and budget reductions. The FCC promised full cooperation and expedited action in cases where we were getting no cooperation in our own enforcement efforts. And looking at the last quarterly report, which ended September, the total hours that the volunteer monitors spent on listening to HF was 6,000 hours. A little over 6,000 on VHF, UHF, and other frequencies. There were 60 incident reports, which means there were 60 problems that they found, but as it turns out, only about 10 of those are really serious problems. I mean, sometimes I'll get an incident report, say, for example, key clicks, and it happens to be a vintage radio net. We're not going to get into that. That's not the type of thing that degrades or debilitates or embarrasses amateur radio. So only about 10 or so were actionable. 8 of those we were able to, 10 or 20, I guess, 8 of those we were able to resolve informally. 2 of them went to the FCC. We sent out about 7 warnings, which seem to have worked except on a couple of frequencies, one of which I'm listening to tonight. I have a small rig upstairs in which I do monitoring. We issued 15 good operator letters, and these are special letters to people who do an especially good job, whether it's running a net or just in a normal QSO or whatever. And as it turns out, 3 of them went to young licensee teenagers who hadn't been licensed too long. So 2 of them have contacted me and said that they were going to frame them and put them on the wall, which I think is a good thing. We had 2 referrals to the FCC, and the FCC gave us 2 cases to work on. Part of the deal was that they could assign us cases to run down where they needed additional evidence but didn't have a field engineer in that area. So that's the statistics. But we also encourage, in some of our cases, some complainants to use their local laws, such as harassment by communications, which many states have laws against harassment by communications, and they were originally designed for telephone harassment, but they've evolved to cover computer and radio as well. For example, A case went to the Tennessee Court of Appeals recently. A local repeater group was getting constant harassment and interference from an operator there in a town in Tennessee. They went to court, harassment by communications, and the judge issued a restraining order. Now, the person that was the subject of the restraining order violated it within an hour. Now, you can't make this stuff up. I mean, this is real life cases. So he was taken back to court, and the judge gave him 30 days in jail. So he went to the Tennessee Court of Appeals with total confidence, I'm sure, that when they argued preemption on the part of the FCC, that he would be turned loose and it would be dismissed. That wasn't the case. The Tennessee Court of Appeals ruled that what was relevant was that the restraining order was violated, not that it was an area of federal preemption. So he served his 30 days in jail, and it was a remarkable attitude adjustment. And hearing him on the air after that, it was just an incredible transformation. And 30 days in jail will do that. A lot of states have these statutes. So it's dangerous to assume that because the FCC is not necessarily out there, that these people who are trying to destroy our bands will be scot-free. We can also ask the FCC to block renewals, upgrades, or even to start a proceeding to modify a license to delete phone privileges in certain cases. So you just can't assume that the FCC is inactive because of COVID restrictions. And it's important to point out, though, that the volunteer monitors are not the band police. Our job is to audit the bands and report significant problems that are degrading amateur radio or endangering amateur radio. And then we try to resolve them, and if we can't, the FCC gets involved in them. And the FCC's made it clear that they expect referrals if we can't get these cases. And as I mentioned earlier, the FCC gives us some cases from time to time to gather evidence. And I want to dispel one all too common notion right now. It's not the no-coders on the bands that cause problems. I never noticed one difference in enforcement when the requirement to know Morse code was eliminated. The problems on the bands, to the extent we have them, are by people who've been licensed long enough to know better. And I have never run into a situation yet where somebody came to me and complained about the code being eliminated, where when I asked them if they had filed comments in the no-code proceeding, they said they had. Most of the people complaining about it never filed comments in the proceeding in the first place. And a lot of those complaining about it haven't made a CW contact in 20 years. And when you look at the statistics of those filing in the no-code proceeding, it was less than 1% of the total amateur population. So that's my position on the no-code. It's not those people, it's people that should know better. Our job is to preserve the bands and enhance them, but we don't babysit the bands, and we don't want to be known as the band cops or the people that are out there babysitting the bands. We have thousands of frequencies, and all of us take examinations on how to use this stuff and how to use the equipment. And we cannot try, and we're not going to try to resolve what are essentially playground disputes, where someone just won't be courteous enough to move a couple of kilohertz out of the way. You know, you hear a lot of mention these days of rights. You hear very little mention of responsibilities. And when it comes to amateur radio, we don't really have frequency rights. If you look at your license, you'll see that you have privileges, not rights, and privileges can be lifted. And the overall point and the philosophy of the program is that we're all in this together. There could be other uses for our frequencies. And when you hear idiotic conduct on 7200, which I have on right now,
you know, you can't have an antenna, but somehow I got it slipped by through
which is reasonably tame, but usually 7200 sounds the best when you don't hear any communications on it other than my S2 noise, which isn't bad at all. But 7200 is a trouble spot. And there could be other uses for all of our frequencies. And when you hear conduct like occasionally happens on 75 meters. Used to be 3860, now it's 7200. That endangers all of our frequencies because we just have the privileges of these frequencies. There's a lot of different uses for radio frequencies, and we're lucky to have the thousands of frequencies that we do. Now, the good news about amateur radio is that we're a cross-section of society. The bad news about amateur radio is that we're a cross-section of today's society, which too often is rude and selfish and boisterous and impolite. We'll take offense when no offense was intended, and we focus on rights and not responsibilities. And all of us have a responsibility not to destroy our own bands. You know, I was often asked over the last 20 years, would the internet destroy amateur radio? Or would Echolink destroy it? There were people who were convinced that Echolink would destroy amateur radio. Or would PSK 31 or FT8 or remote stations destroy it? Or would WhatsApp or texting destroy it? And obviously they haven't. The biggest threat to amateur radio, if you really want to know what it is, the biggest threat to amateur radio is the microphone. And you'll hear that on sometimes on 75 and sometimes 40, as I said. It's the ugly, deliberate interference situations with slander and juvenile delinquents who have thousands of dollars of radio equipment, or rather, I should say, adults acting as juvenile delinquents. They have thousands of dollars of radio equipment, beautiful signals, and they act like that on the bands. It's an embarrassment. I think it was Edward R. Murrow who said, just because your opinion can be heard around the world does not mean it's any more important than when it can be heard only at the end of the bar. And we need to all think about that. Too many people take the bait, get into an argument. We have a responsibility to pass on this joyful avocation to future licensees in at least as good a shape as we found it. On some of these conduct situations, it's not just the actions of the guilty parties, it's the overall conduct that would eventually destroy amateur radio. And we don't have the same clout, for example, with our next series of challenges. We don't have the same clout with the solar industry as we do with the power industry. Now, the power industry overall for radio frequency interference has been exceptionally cooperative. In fact, they have been on a board, and I have been on this board, this committee. We've been working for about 3 years, and we're just about done with it, to come up with an IEEE standard for resolving power line interference. But in the next few years, solar power interference, especially interference from these vast solar panel arrays, will far outnumber radio frequency interference from power lines. The very large arrays have devices called optimizers, and these are on the extremely large fields, which act, the optimizers ramp up certain sections of solar panels when other sections of solar panels are blocked by clouds, and it tears up amateur radio big time. So we have to take the high road and not embarrass ourselves and not aggravate ourselves to death, because we have to work with the solar industry. And if the solar industry listens to our frequencies, we don't want to be embarrassed before a Senate or a congressional subcommittee or whatever. It's not against the FCC rules to make an ass of yourself on the microphone. But every time you do, you invite extinction and you invite other uses of our frequency. The main thing about, and the Orientals have a saying about Americans, that Americans always take the bait. And we have to get in an argument. We hear something we don't like, we have to get in an argument. But on every receiver ever made and every transmitter, or every transceiver, there's one big knob. It's the biggest one on there, and it's made real big for a purpose. So you can easily change frequencies without having to open the instruction manual. It's just an intuitive giant knob on there. They could be all the same size. In the older rigs that would have 46 knobs and buttons, there was one big one, which was the BFO. And on other rigs, modern day rigs, it's the same way. So when you hear things that are harmful to amateur radio, just I would advise people not to engage, as tempting as it may be. Just turn the big knob and think about your responsibilities and what you owe amateur radio. And if you don't do that, you'll contribute to making it extinct. The purpose of our program is to prevent that. We want amateur radio to last 100 years. I used to say 1,000 years, but I don't even think Earth will be here in 1,000 years at the rate we're going, so I'd be happy with 100 years. But our purpose of our program is to enhance radio and to prevent extinction, and neither we nor the FCC can regulate idiocy on the bands or selfishness. So I would just encourage people, listen to what you're saying, what you sound like. Act on the air as if you knew that there was a grandfather or grandmother somewhere demonstrating amateur radio to a 12-year-old who might be a future licensee, future inventor, future scientist, or whatever. And if you don't sound good enough to do that, then I would really hope that you would look at your conduct on the bands. Overall, amateur radio has splendid and always has had splendid compliance, but maybe being in enforcement too long, I tend to focus on the bad spots, but we need to, we just don't need to engage that. And if you do hear it, leave the frequency. A couple of nets I have pulled out of because they were a little too raw for me, and they were not a good reflection on amateur radio. And I've lost some long-term friends over the way they acted on the radio. That's the price we pay, and that's what we have to do if we want to keep it. But if there are any volunteer monitors listening, I want to thank you for the last 10 months. You have really put in a lot of hours, a lot of good information. And you know, these guys that are acting, and women too, that we have that are acting as volunteer monitors, they could be spending that time enjoying amateur radio. But to the extent they use their time to monitor, they're using their time to help preserve and enhance amateur radio. So I can't thank them enough. The program was much more difficult to set up than I thought, but it's running much better than I thought that it would be at this point. And so February will be our 1-year mark. And I'm really, really happy with the way the program's gone. We haven't been able to have a lot of meetings with the league or any meetings in person because of COVID. But the good thing about the volunteer monitor program is their work is done from home in front of the rig anyhow. So it hasn't affected us like it has other aspects of the hobby, such as Hamfest. I would give anything to go to a Hamfest. I took them for granted before, but I never will again. When everything opens up, I'm going to try to go to every one within 250 miles. I just really miss them. And it's a camaraderie which we're suffering from not having during COVID, but hopefully this next year will be better. And thank you, Tom, for having me on. And I'll update you on our program anytime you want to. And it's good to see all of you folks here on the program.
You know, Brian, just a couple of questions. Now, are these volunteers, are they kind of anonymous? Do their names get...
No, they're not anonymous. We just don't publish the names. And the reason for that is towards the end of the OO program, a lot of the OOs were really demoralized because they would send somebody a notice and then they would hear themselves being talked about and ridiculed on the air. Mm-hmm. You know, 25 years ago, if you got a notice from an OO, you looked at it and said, man, I'm glad I heard from them rather than the FCC. But these days, at the end of the OO program, people would get a notice from the OO. And of course, what do they think about? You know what they're thinking about. How can I sue this person? What right do they have to send me a notice, even though they're trying to do you a favor? Mm-hmm. So it's not keeping them anonymous. We just don't publish who they are. And the FCC insisted on that too, because they wanted them to be free.
And, you know, another thing I like that you mentioned there is this group sends out good operation letters. Back in the 60s, nobody sent me a good operation letter, you know. I did get a letter once, and it was one of those bad letters from the FCC.
Well, they're free to nominate certain licensees for a good operator letter, and the FCC wanted us to encourage good operation, as well as discourage bad operations. So there is a good operator. What is that? Good operator report, W2AEW. Man, that must have been a mistake. I'm just kidding. But we've had some very deserving licensees get these letters, and we go over them quite, the nominations, we really go over them. Dan Henderson at the league and I, maybe a couple other people, we look at each and every report sent in and decide who gets it. And out of about 50 that are sent, I would say maybe 5 get letters, but it's a good thing to have. And I still have my original A1 operator certificate, I think it was called, by the ARRL in the old days. I still have that in one of my first logbooks.
Yeah.
Riley, I wanted to mention that I got an OO report when I first got into ham radio. I had bad key clicks on my CW, and I wasn't aware of it. And so I got that card in the mail, and I was so happy that it wasn't an official, it wasn't an FCC report. I was so happy that it was an OO report. I actually put that report up on my QSL cards on the wall.
Yeah. And and I got an OO one too. I might have got 2 OO cards. I think I was like 2 cycles out of my novice band one time. But I got that card. But
I have another question for you, Riley.
Sure.
Do you have any openings in your volunteer observer program, and how would we, and if there are, how would we contact to get into that?
What we did to solicit applications was we announced it on the league website, and we got 250 applications right off the bat within the filing window. So we closed the filing window in July. Then we started the process of telephone interviews with every one of these applicants. That's what I did last summer, not this past summer, but the one before that. And we expected to open it up to additional applications frequently, but there hasn't been any turnover. We've had one person that got COVID and asked to be relieved for a while, but we redshirted them and kept them in the reserve pool. And we have about 50 in the reserve pool who can't be in the program right now, but whose application looked good and want to be. We didn't really, this is the thing that it still amazes me to this day, and I'm happy about. We didn't say no to anybody. This first batch of applications were excellent. We had broadcast engineers. We had software designers for SDR, for Apple, a lot of good applications. So if it looked good, we said, you're on. And I think in the spring, probably we would open it up again, and you would see announcements of that on the league website. And it would say that we're taking applications for volunteer monitors again. Some of these people may get tired of doing it. I've only had one person resign, and that was because they didn't like the FCC's posture on language on the amateur band. But we periodically have someone that says, I have severe job requirements or health issues in the family. I'd like to be put on the standby list. And we put them back in the reserve pool. But I would say that at the earliest, next spring, we may ask for a few more applications. But the way that would be announced would be on the league news items, and there'd be a lengthy filing period and plenty of publicity. But we had some really, really good applications, and you didn't have to have a lot of exotic qualifications or equipment. We have people that have the basic transceiver with the wire antenna. We have people who have antenna farms and tens of thousands of dollars of equipment. We have them across the board in that sense, and we're a little sparse in some states such as Iowa. I don't think we have a volunteer monitor there, but that has been a very sane state from a radio standpoint anyway. If you needed one person in Iowa, it means you would need 3,000 in California. Mm-hmm. But you know how that goes.
Yeah.
But, I was really happy with the general spread and coverage of the volunteer monitors, and by chance we were able to have additional coverage in areas that the FCC requested. So that part of it went well. But you have my call sign, and anybody that has any questions about this anytime, just send me an email and I will call you. It may take a day or two, but I will call you or answer your email.
All right. You're in QRZ, and let's see. Let me put your call back up. There we go. K4ZDH. Look him up in QRZ and send Riley an email.
And I'll answer it. I'll answer every one of them. It may take me a day or two, but you'll get an answer.
Yeah. Well, man, Riley, we really appreciate it having you here tonight. You have been a part of this show. In fact, you have a 15-minute segment each week on here, and when you're not here, we just have 15 minutes of silence. So, if you know, anytime you want to come back on here, you can fill that spot. All right.
That reminds me of I worked for an AM radio station in high school, and we had to read the obituaries every week.
Oh boy.
Play organ music.
Yeah.
And if nobody died that week in Rock Hill, South Carolina,
so what do you do?
5 minutes of silence.
Is that right?
Organ music. So you could do that on your show.
I guess we could.
Real quick.
We could do that, man. Hey, thanks so much, man. And